My girlfriend secretly let her unemployed ex live in my house with keys she gave him, until one choice I made turned the tables overnight. I'm 28, male, and I've been dating a Liliana, 25, female, for about 2 years now. She moved in with me about 10 months ago when her lease was up, and things seemed pretty solid, or so I thought. The whole thing started on a Wednesday. I'd been dealing with a nightmare client all week who kept asking for just one more tiny change to their logo design. After the 15th revision request, I decided to call it a day early and head home around 3 p.m. Instead of my usual 6, I pulled into my driveway and noticed nothing weird. Liliana's car wasn't there, which was normal since she usually doesn't get home until 5:30. I was already planning my afternoon, maybe catch up on some Netflix and enjoy a rare moment of peace before diving back into logo hell tomorrow. I unlocked my front door and immediately heard my blasting. That was weird. I always turn everything off before leaving. It's like a compulsion. Maybe a Liliana came home sick but her car wasn't there. I thought maybe I forgot or there was some electrical issue. When I walked into my living room, I nearly dropped my keys. There was this dude on my couch, not just sitting there like he was waiting for someone. He was full on lounging, feet up on my coffee table, eating what looked like my leftover pizza from last night, remote in hand like he owned the place. He had a scraggly beard, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and basketball shorts that had seen better days. The guy looked like he hadn't seen a job interview in years. For a second I thought I was being robbed by the world's most comfortable burglar. But then he looked up at me with zero panic, zero guilt, just this casual oh hey expression like we were roommates or something. "Who are you and what the hell are you doing in my house?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level, but my brain was racing through possibilities. Home invasion, a Liliana's brother I'd never met, some kind of maintenance guy who let himself in. "Oh, you must be Toby," he said, not even pausing the TV. "I'm Reggie. A Liliana gave me the keys." He said this like it explained everything, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Reggie. I'd heard that name before. It took me a few seconds to place it, but then it hit me like a brick to the face. Reggie was a Liliana's ex-boyfriend, the one she dated for 3 years before me, the one she supposedly cut contact with when we got serious, the one who, according to her, was totally in the past and not someone she even thought about anymore. "She gave you keys to my house?" I asked, still trying to process this. "Why? For emergencies, man. Sometimes I need somewhere to hang out during the day. My parents' place gets a bit intense," he said, taking another bite of my pizza that I was planning to eat for lunch tomorrow. I was standing in my own living room, looking at my girlfriend's ex-boyfriend eating my food and watching my TV, and he was talking like this was a completely reasonable arrangement, like a Liliana handing out keys to my house without asking me was just normal girlfriend behavior. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "A couple of months now. A Liliana's cool about it. She knows I'm between jobs right now and needs somewhere to chill," he replied. "Between jobs, right?" From what I was seeing, this guy looked like he'd been between jobs for a while. "A couple of months." My girlfriend had been letting her unemployed ex-boyfriend use my house as his personal hangout spot for months, and I had no idea. I'm paying the mortgage, the utilities, the internet he's probably using, and she's treating it like a community center. "Does she know you're here today?" I asked, hoping maybe this was some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe he was supposed to only come by when I wasn't home, which would still be completely unacceptable, but at least it would mean a Liliana had some awareness of boundaries. "Nah, she's at work, but she said I could use the place whenever I needed to." "Cool setup you got here, by the way," he said, gesturing around my living room with my pizza slice. "Way better than my parents' basement." So, not only had a Liliana been letting him use my house without my knowledge, but she'd given him complete free access. No schedule, no restrictions. Just come and go as he pleased in the house I pay for. Using the utilities I pay for. Eating the food I pay for. I was trying to stay calm, but I could feel my blood pressure rising. This wasn't just about the keys, or the pizza, or even the principle of the thing. This was about respect, basic, fundamental respect for your partner and their property. And a Liliana had apparently decided that my house was her house, and her house was available to whoever she wanted to invite over. "You need to leave," I told him. "Come on, man, don't be like that. I'm not causing any trouble. Just watching some TV, eating a little snack. I'll be out of here before a Liliana gets home if that's what you're worried about," he said. The fact that he thought I was worried about a Liliana knowing he was here rather than being pissed that he was here at all, told me everything I needed to know about how this situation had been framed to him. She'd probably told him I was some controlling boyfriend who wouldn't understand their friendship. "I'm not worried about a Liliana knowing. I'm telling you to get out of my house because you don't belong here," I said. The front door opened and I heard a Liliana's voice calling out, "Babe, I'm home." Her timing couldn't have been more perfect, or worse, depending on how you looked at it. She walked into the living room and froze when she saw both of us standing there. For just a second, I saw panic flash across her face, but then she recovered and put on this bright smile like nothing was wrong. "Oh, hey, you two met. Toby, this is Reggie." "Reggie, this is my boyfriend Toby," she said. Like we were all just friends hanging out, like this was a completely normal situation, like she was happy to facilitate. The silence in that room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Liliana was standing there with her fake smile. Reggie was looking between us like he was watching a tennis match, and I was trying to figure out how the hell my girlfriend thought this introduction was going to go smoothly. "We need to talk," I told Liliana privately, but she insisted we were all adults and could discuss anything in front of Reggie because, apparently, the unemployed ex-boyfriend who'd been treating my living room like his personal man cave was now part of our relationship's inner circle. I was wondering what that made me in this twisted hierarchy she'd created. When I asked her when she was planning to tell me about giving Reggie keys to my house, she got this defensive tone and claimed it just never came up in conversation. Never came up, like handing out access to my property was such casual small talk that it would slip anyone's mind to mention it. Her justification was that Reggie needed somewhere to hang out during the day because his living situation was complicated, meaning he's a grown man living with his parents who apparently gets his feelings hurt when his mommy has book club over. So, naturally, the solution was to make my house his personal escape room, without bothering to run it by the guy who actually lived there. When I pointed out that maybe, just maybe, major decisions about who has keys to my house should involve me, she hit me with a classic manipulation playbook. First, I was being controlling. Then, I was paranoid. Then, she threw around terms like toxic masculinity because, apparently, having boundaries about your living space makes you some kind of Neanderthal. "I knew you'd react like this," she said, which told me everything I needed to know. She'd been planning this conversation, probably rehearsing her victim's speech while her ex was eating my leftovers. The really twisted part was that she and Reggie had clearly been discussing this. She'd been painting me as this unreasonable boyfriend to justify her sketchy behavior. They'd probably had whole conversations about how controlling I was while he was sitting on my couch eating my food. The disrespect was so layered it was almost impressive. When I tried to explain that this wasn't about controlling her friendships but about basic respect for your partner, Liliana flipped the script entirely. "It's our house," she said. "I live here too." So, I had to remind her that while she lived here, her name wasn't on the mortgage, she didn't pay utilities, only contributed to groceries, and that was it. The words came out harsher than I intended, but I was past caring about hurting feelings at this point. Her face flushed red. I'd hit a nerve, but it was a nerve that needed hitting. She'd been acting like she had equal say in what happened in this house, when the reality was that she was essentially a long-term guest who helped with expenses. She started throwing around words like ownership and control, like I was some kind of property-obsessed maniac instead of a guy who didn't want strangers camping out in his living room. The gaslighting was so thick you could swim in it. The funniest part was when she tried to frame this as me not respecting her friendships, like the issue was that I didn't want her to have friends, not that she'd been lying to me for months while facilitating some loser's daily vacation from reality at my expense. She was either genuinely delusional or hoping I was stupid enough to buy this version of events. Reggie finally started to realize that even he couldn't defend this situation. The man might be unemployed, but he wasn't completely brain dead. "Maybe I should go," he suggested. "I don't want to cause problems between you two." But Liliana wasn't having it. "You're not causing problems," she told him quickly. "Toby's just being unreasonable." She doubled down so hard on this being reasonable that she couldn't back down now without admitting she was completely in the wrong. So instead of taking the exit ramp Reggie offered, she escalated. "If you kick him out, I'm going with him." There it was, the ultimatum. It's the kind of move someone makes when they think they're holding all the cards, when they've convinced themselves that their partner would rather accept disrespect than risk being alone. But here's the thing about ultimatums: they only work if the other person is actually afraid of losing you. And sitting there, watching my girlfriend of 2 years choose her unemployed ex-boyfriend's comfort over our relationship, I realized that what I'd be losing wasn't worth keeping. "Go ahead," I told her, "but don't forget to come back tomorrow to pack your stuff." The look on her face was priceless, pure shock. She genuinely thought I'd cave, apologize, maybe even thank her for helping me recognize my controlling tendencies. She was so confident in her manipulation that she never considered I might actually have enough self-respect to walk away. "Gladly," she managed to say, but her voice wavered. "I can't believe how childish you're being about this." Childish, right? Because the mature thing to do is sneak around behind your partner's back and then call them names when confronted about it. She stormed off to the bedroom to grab some clothes, with Reggie trailing behind her like a confused puppy. I'm guessing the reality of their situation was hitting him too. His free hangout spot had just evaporated, And now he was responsible for housing the drama queen who created this whole mess. They were both gone within 10 minutes. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than when I came home earlier. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of an empty house. It was the hollow quiet of something ending. I walked around my living room, and there was a weird sense of relief. Like I'd been carrying around this nagging feeling that something was off, and now I finally knew what it was. How many other decisions had Liliana been making behind my back? How many other boundaries had she crossed that I just hadn't discovered yet? Thursday morning hit differently. I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, with no sounds of someone else moving around getting ready for work. I'd barely finished my first cup of coffee when I heard a car pull into the driveway. Through the window, I could see Liliana's Honda Civic, followed by what I assumed was Reggie's beat-up Toyota Camry. The cavalry had arrived to collect her belongings, right on schedule. What I wasn't expecting was the attitude. Liliana walked through my front door like she was doing me a massive favor by showing up, not sheepish, not apologetic, not even slightly embarrassed about the situation. She had this air of righteous indignation, like I was the unreasonable one, and she was graciously accommodating my childish demands. Reggie followed behind her, looking uncomfortable but trying to play the supportive friend role. The guy clearly didn't want to be there, but Liliana had probably guilt-tripped him into helping. After all, where else was he going to spend his day now that his free entertainment center was off limits? "This won't take long," Liliana announced, heading straight for the bedroom without making eye contact, like she was announcing her departure time to a landlord instead of talking to someone she'd been in a relationship with for 2 years. I stayed in the kitchen. The sounds coming from the bedroom were telling though. Drawers opening and closing, hangers sliding across the closet rod, the occasional thud of something heavy being dropped into a box. She was being thorough, which surprised me. I'd half expected her to grab a few outfits and leave the rest, planning to come back later when I'd supposedly cooled down and become more reasonable. But no, she was legitimately moving out. What really got to me was hearing them talk while they packed, not the words themselves, because they were keeping their voices low, but the casual familiarity of it. Reggie knew where her stuff was. He was helping her decide what to take and what to leave. They had this easy rhythm, like they'd done this before, which made me wonder if maybe they had. Had she moved out of his place the same way when they broke up? Was this just her standard operating procedure for ending relationships? Pack up with the next guy in line while the current boyfriend sits in the kitchen pretending not to care? The most ridiculous part was watching Reggie try to be helpful. The guy was clearly out of his element, probably because he'd never had to help anyone move out of a place he actually paid for. He kept dropping things and asking Liliana where stuff should go, like he was some hired hand instead of the reason this whole situation started. At one point I heard her snap at him about being careful with something fragile, and I couldn't help but smile. Already having relationship tension with her knight in shining armor, and they hadn't even been back together for 24 hours, that was promising for the long-term success of whatever arrangement they thought they were going to have. The whole process took about 3 hours. 3 hours to pack up 2 years of shared living space and load it into 2 cars. It felt anticlimactic somehow, all that time building a life together, and it could be undone in a single morning with some cardboard boxes and garbage bags. When they were finished, Liliana came inside one last time. I was still in the kitchen, scrolling through my phone, pretending to be busy with something important. She stood in the doorway for a minute, maybe waiting for me to look up and give her some kind of dramatic farewell scene. "I think that's everything," she said finally. I looked around the living room, which already felt different without her stuff cluttering every surface. Cleaner, more spacious, more like my actual taste instead of some compromise between what I wanted and what she thought looked good. "Looks like it," I agreed. She seemed like she wanted to say something else, maybe some parting shot about how I'd regret this, or how she hoped I'd learn to be less controlling, or how she was better off without someone who didn't appreciate her friendship with her ex. But whatever speech she'd prepared stayed unspoken. Instead, she just turned and walked out, closing the door behind her with a little more force than necessary. Through the window, I watched her get into her car while Reggie climbed into his. A brief conversation through their open windows, probably about where they were going next. And then they were both gone. The silence that followed was different from the night before. Less hollow, more peaceful, like the house was finally able to exhale after holding its breath for months. For the first time in months, my house felt like mine again. And despite everything that had happened, despite the relationship ending, the drama with Reggie, and all the accusations about being controlling, I felt good. Really good. I was finally free to find out what it felt like to be with someone who didn't think lying and manipulation were acceptable relationship strategies. Someone who wouldn't give her ex-boyfriend keys to my house, and then call me paranoid for having a problem with it. The bar had been set pretty low, but at least now I knew where it was. 3 days. That's how long my peace lasted before the universe decided to test my resolve again. Sunday evening, I was on my couch, watching a game and eating pizza directly from the box like a civilized adult male when I heard a car in the driveway. My first thought was that maybe I'd ordered something online and forgotten about it. Sunday delivery wasn't common, but it happened. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of Liliana's car door slamming shut. That particular door had a squeak she'd been meaning to get fixed for 6 months but never bothered with, followed by what sounded like luggage wheels rolling across my driveway. I looked out the window, and there she was, dragging 2 suitcases up my front steps like she was checking into a hotel. Her hair was a mess, her clothes looked like she'd slept in them, and she had this determined expression, like she was about to solve a major problem through sheer willpower. A doorbell rang, which was interesting. She still had her key, as far as I knew, but apparently she was choosing to announce her presence instead of just walking in. Maybe 3 days with Reggie had taught her something about boundaries after all. I opened the door, and she immediately launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech. "Hey babe, I missed you so much." "I'm back," she said, like she'd just returned from a vacation instead of dramatically storming out with her ex-boyfriend after choosing him over our relationship. The casual tone was incredible. No acknowledgement of what had happened. No apology, no explanation. Just this cheerful announcement that she'd decided to come home. She tried to push past me with her suitcases, but I blocked the doorway. The entitlement was staggering. After everything that had gone down, she genuinely expected to just walk back into my house and resume our relationship like nothing had happened. "What are you doing here, Liliana?" I asked. "I live here," she said, like it was obvious. "I know we had a fight, but I'm ready to work things out now." A fight. She was calling the discovery of her secret key to sharing arrangement with her unemployed ex-boyfriend a fight, like we disagreed about what movie to watch, instead of her fundamentally betraying my trust, and then choosing to leave with the guy who'd been freeloading off my hospitality. I could see her starting to get frustrated that I wasn't immediately welcoming her back with open arms. She'd probably spent the entire drive over here convincing herself that I'd missed her terribly and would be grateful for the chance to reconcile. "Things didn't work out with Reggie?" I asked. Her face flushed red, which told me everything I needed to know. Whatever fantasy reunion she'd imagined with her ex had crashed into reality pretty quickly. 3 days was apparently enough time for both of them to remember why they'd broken up in the first place. "That's not what this is about," she said, trying to regain control of the narrative. I realized I was being hasty. "We have something good together, and I don't want to throw it away over a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. Now our entire relationship crisis had been downgraded to a simple miscommunication, not a fundamental breach of trust, not a pattern of deceptive behavior, just a little oopsie that could be cleared up with good intentions and positive thinking. The really insulting part was how she was acting like she was doing me a favor by coming back, like I should be grateful that she'd reconsidered her decision to leave me for her unemployed ex-boyfriend, like this was some generous gift she was bestowing, rather than a desperate attempt to avoid the consequences of her choices. "Reggie doesn't have his own place," she continued. "He's still living with his parents, so there's not really room for me there long term." There it was. The real reason for her dramatic return. Not because she'd missed me or realized she'd made a mistake or had some profound revelation about our relationship. She was back because her backup plan had fallen through, and she needed somewhere to live. "His parents don't really like me," she added, like this additional detail would somehow make her situation more sympathetic. "His mom thinks I'm a bad influence." The irony was incredible. Reggie's mother, who presumably knew her son well enough to recognize his lack of ambition and direction, had correctly identified that Liliana was making his already pathetic situation worse. Meanwhile, I'd been labeled as controlling for not wanting this same person to have unlimited access to my house. She was standing on my doorstep with her suitcases, essentially admitting that she'd left me for a guy who couldn't even provide her with basic housing, and somehow expecting me to welcome her back like nothing had happened. The audacity was actually impressive. "I wasn't kidding when I said we were done," I told her. "Come on, don't be dramatic. We can work through this," she said. Dramatic, right? Because wanting your partner to be honest with you and not give random people keys to your house was such an unreasonable standard. Because having self-respect was just performative drama instead of basic human dignity. She tried a different approach, softening her voice and putting on what I recognized as her reasonable girlfriend persona, the one she used when she wanted something but didn't want to admit she was being manipulative about it. "Look, I know I made some mistakes, but don't you think you're overreacting a little? I mean, I came back. That should count for something." The logic was fascinating. In her mind, the fact that she'd returned after her other option failed was proof of her commitment to our relationship, not an admission that she'd made terrible choices. Not evidence that she'd only left because she thought she had something better lined up. Just a demonstration of how much she valued what we had together. "You came back because you don't have anywhere else to go," I pointed out. "That's not true." I have options, she said, but she couldn't name any of those options, probably because they didn't exist. If she'd had other places to stay, other people willing to take her in, she wouldn't be standing on my doorstep with luggage, trying to negotiate her way back into a relationship she'd voluntarily destroyed. The whole situation was a perfect example of how some people operate. They burn bridges, assuming they'll never need to cross them again, then act surprised when they find themselves stranded on the wrong side of the river. Liliana had been so confident in her ability to manipulate both me and Reggie that she'd never considered what would happen if both options disappeared. Now she was finding out that actions have consequences, and those consequences don't disappear just because you change your mind about wanting them. What happened next was like watching someone realize their usual playbook wasn't going to work. When Liliana figured out I wasn't going to cave and let her waltz back into my life, she started getting increasingly desperate. She tried to push past me again, this time more aggressively, saying something about how she just needed to get inside and we could talk properly, as if the location of our conversation was the problem, not the fundamental issue that she'd betrayed my trust and then tried to manipulate me into thinking it was my fault. I didn't budge. My house, my rules, and rule number one was that people who choose their unemployed ex-boyfriends over me don't get to change their minds when reality hits. When physical persistence didn't work, she switched tactics completely. Suddenly, she was full of promises about how things would be different this time. She'd be more considerate about my feelings. She'd make sure I was comfortable with any decisions that affected our living situation. What really got me was how she kept saying our house and our relationship, like nothing had changed, like her dramatic exit with her suitcases and her ex-boyfriend had been some kind of brief intermission instead of a clear statement about her priorities. The whole performance was exhausting to watch. She started bringing up specific memories from our relationship. Remember when we went to that concert and had such a great time? Remember how good we were together when we weren't fighting? It was manipulation 101, trying to make me focus on the good times instead of the reason we were having this conversation on my doorstep with her. Luggage between us, like our relationship's highlight reel, could somehow erase the fact that she'd chosen her ex-boyfriend over me just 3 days ago. Then she started yelling about how stubborn I was being, how I was throwing away a good relationship over nothing, how she couldn't believe I was being so petty. The volume kept escalating until I was sure my neighbors were getting an earful of our business. The accusations started flying. I was immature. I was holding grudges. I was too proud to admit when I was wrong. According to her, my refusal to take her back was evidence of serious character flaws that she'd apparently been tolerating out of the goodness of her heart. She stood there on my doorstep, tears streaming down her face, talking about how much she'd missed me, how sorry she was, and how she just wanted us to be happy together again. If I hadn't known the timeline, if I hadn't known that she'd spent the last 3 days trying to make things work with Reggie, it might have been convincing. But I did know the timeline. I knew she was only here because her first choice had failed. I knew these tears were about her situation, not about genuinely missing our relationship. The performance went on for a good 10 minutes, sobbing about how she'd made a mistake, how she'd learned her lesson, how she just needed one more chance to prove she could be the girlfriend I deserved. It was Oscar-worthy, really. When I didn't respond to the tears, she got desperate. That's when she tried to force her way past me and into the house. "I'm not leaving," she announced, trying to grab her suitcases and push through the doorway simultaneously. This is ridiculous. I had to physically block her, which felt surreal. 3 days ago, this woman had been my girlfriend. Now, I was literally preventing her from entering my house while she screamed about her rights and her belongings and how unfair I was being. She managed to get one suitcase partway through the door before I could stop her, then used it as leverage to try to squeeze past me. The desperation was palpable. She was willing to force her way into my house, rather than accept that her manipulation tactics weren't working. "You can't just shut me out forever," she panted, still struggling with her luggage. "We need to talk about this." I had to grab both her suitcases and physically remove them from my doorway, then shut the door firmly between us. She immediately started pounding on it, demanding I let her in, threatening to call the police, claiming I was being unreasonable. The threats were empty, of course. What was she going to tell the cops? That her ex-boyfriend wouldn't let her move back in after she'd dramatically left him for another guy? That she'd voluntarily packed all her stuff and taken it with her but now wanted to unpack it again? After about 20 minutes of this circus, Aliana finally seemed to realize that I wasn't going to open the door. The pounding stopped, the yelling died down, and I heard her dragging her suitcases back down the steps, but she didn't leave. Through the window, I could see her sitting on the hood of her car, phone pressed to her ear, having what looked like an intense conversation with someone, probably calling in reinforcements, getting advice from friends or family about how to handle a boyfriend who'd suddenly developed a backbone. That's when I knew this wasn't over. Liliana wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She'd spent too many years getting her way through persistence and manipulation to give up after one failed attempt. I was right. 20 minutes later, my phone started ringing. Her parents. I saw her mom's name on my caller ID and knew exactly what was happening. Liliana had called, probably spinning some sob story about how her unreasonable boyfriend was being cruel and vindictive over a simple misunderstanding. I let it go to voicemail. Then I let the next 3 calls go to voicemail too. By the time her dad started calling from his cell phone, I figured I should probably hear what kind of narrative Liliana had constructed about our situation. Her mother's voice was that special combination of disappointed and condescending that some parents perfect when they think their adult child is being mistreated. "Toby, honey, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding between you and Liliana. She's very upset and says you won't even talk to her about working things out. You two have been so good together, and it would be such a shame to throw that away over a little argument." A little argument. That's what Liliana had told them. Not that she'd been secretly giving her unemployed ex-boyfriend access to my house for months. Not that she'd chosen to leave with him when confronted. Just a little disagreement between lovers that could be smoothed over with some mature conversation. The voicemails kept coming. Her father was more direct, using his stern dad voice to tell me that relationships require compromise and forgiveness. That holding grudges was immature. That Liliana was a good girl who deserved better than being treated like this. Good girl, right? The good girl who'd been lying to me for months while facilitating her ex's daily vacation from reality at my expense. What really got to me was how confident they sounded, like they knew exactly what had happened and had determined that I was completely in the wrong. Liliana had clearly given them a heavily edited version of events that cast her as the victim of my unreasonable behavior. The calls continued throughout the evening, her parents tag-teaming me with voicemails, each one slightly more insistent than the last. They weren't taking no for an answer, probably because Liliana had convinced them that I just needed the right kind of persuasion to see reason. Then I decided to block their numbers. I had enough stress in my life without listening to lectures from people who didn't know the full story and apparently weren't interested in hearing it. But Liliana's family was persistent. When they couldn't reach me by phone, they started texting long messages about forgiveness and second chances and not letting pride ruin a good relationship. Her sister got involved, sending me paragraphs about how much Liliana loved me and how sorry she was for whatever had happened. The sister's messages were particularly annoying because they came with this tone of sisterly authority, like she had special insight into Liliana's character that I somehow lacked after 2 years of dating her. According to the sister, Liliana had always been impulsive but had a good heart, and sometimes good people made mistakes that deserved forgiveness. Impulsive. That was an interesting way to describe months of secretly giving your ex-boyfriend access to your current boyfriend's house. Not deceptive, not disrespectful, just impulsive, like it was a momentary lapse in judgment rather than a sustained pattern of dishonest behavior. I decided I needed to get ahead of this situation before it spiraled completely out of control. I called my parents and asked if I could come over to talk. I started from the beginning. They listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, they were both quiet for a long moment. Then Dad asked the question I'd been dreading, "Are you sure you're not just being stubborn because your ego got bruised?" It was a fair question, and I'd been asking myself the same thing for days. Was this really about principles and respect, or was I just pissed off that she'd chosen someone else over me, even temporarily? But thinking through everything again, laying out the timeline, the deception, and the complete lack of accountability on Liliana's part, I knew this wasn't about ego. This was about fundamental compatibility, about whether I wanted to be in a relationship with someone who thought this kind of behavior was acceptable. "She lied to me for months, Dad," I said. "Not about something small, about giving another guy access to my house. And when I found out, instead of apologizing or trying to make it right, she called me controlling and left with him." Mom nodded slowly. "And now she's back because it didn't work out with the other guy." That seemed to crystallize something for both of them. Their expressions shifted from cautious neutrality to supportive parent mode. "Then you're absolutely right to end it," Mom said. "Nobody should have to be someone's plan B." Having someone in my corner who understood the situation felt like a huge relief. I hadn't realized how much the constant pressure from Liliana's family was affecting me until I had someone validate that my decision made sense. But of course, Liliana wasn't done. It was a Saturday morning when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. Multiple car doors, which was definitely not a good sign. She thought showing up alone would be too normal, so she brought back up her parents. They hit me with every guilt trip in the book. Forgiveness, second chance,